Wheated Bourbon is incredibly popular for those who want something that's a little bit sweeter and typically a little bit softer on the palate. And a fairly recent entry into the game of Wheated Bourbons, compared to some of our legacy distilleries here, is Ben Holladay. I have tried a few of the different Ben Holladay products. There's kind of limited distribution in Washington, so it's not like we get some of the really interesting stuff, but I really liked the base soft red wheat. And not too long ago, we finally had Rickhouse Proof become available in Washington State. And I like the regular soft red wheat. I think it's actually the cooler of the labels that Ben Holladay does aesthetically. So, of course, when this became available, I grabbed one. Now, I've had it sitting for a little bit, but I think it's time we decide whether or not the Rickhouse Proof Ben Holladay Soft Red Wheat is a shelf hero or a shelf zero. Let's do this on 2 Minute Tuesday. It is a screw top, so no fancy cork pop, but let's get it poured, let it rest a little bit, and get into our notes. Now, one important thing to note about the Ben Holladay products is they have a fantastic side label that gives you all the details about your bottle. So as an example, this one is distilled in fall of 2017. It was bottled in the April of 2024. It was Rickhouse C. It tells you in the blend the percentage of what floors this was aged on. Mine was toward the middle floor, so 3 and 4, 64% of it being from floor 4. And this sits at a lovely 119.8 proof. So we're getting just over the territory of something like Weller Full Proof and a little bit under a few of the other like high proof wheaters that can be out there. Some of like the old elk picks, as an example, get into like the 130s, but pretty solid proof overall. So 6 years, pretty solid for most wheated bourbons. Now that we've got our pour a little rested, let's get into 2 Minute Tuesday. Got great color. I mean, pretty typical for about 6 years, but it's just a nice kind of typical bourbon color. Got some decent viscosity on the glass. Let's get in the nose. Okay, so for 119.8 proof, so basically 120 proof, this is really soft on the nose, kind of impressively so. Also, with it being soft on the nose, it makes it a little hard to get any in-my-face notes. There's a small touch of like the wheat funk for those of you who are familiar with that. Definitely a little bit of like your kind of sugary sweetness. It typically comes with wheaters. Wheaters tend to be a little more fruity usually, but I'm not getting any big fruit notes out of the nose here. So let's test the palate and see if that changes. The interesting part that I get right away is one, reasonable viscosity, and I feel it like right here is where it feels like it's sitting. Like normally the kind of Kentucky hug, that warmth that you get usually sits through here for me, but this feels like it's like sitting right here, kind of in the jowls, you know? That's a little strange. Most whiskey doesn't do that. There's not a like big dominant fruity note, which is what I typically like at a lot of wheaters. This is more that like funky wheater, but kind of in a like almost Four Roses floral way. So for those of you who are familiar with kind of floral notes, I get a little bit of floral notes out of Weller 107. I definitely get it out of certain recipes of Four Roses, and I'm getting something very similar here. And it just happens to be how the funkiness is hitting me, I guess, where it's kind of almost perfumey, and not in an overbearing, annoying way, but just it's kind of one of those things you're like, that's not what I was expecting. There is definitely a sweetness up front, but it fades pretty fast into that floral note. And that floral kind of thing is really the dominant note that I'm getting through most of my palate. A touch of oak presence, but a lot of the spice, the pepperiness that would come out of the barrel char is just not present. There's so little of it on the finish. It is mostly that like big kind of floral funky note. That's kind of it. I mean, this is not as complex as I kind of thought it would be. Let's go to an overall score. This isn't complex enough to really hit high on the charts for me, but I think at its price point as a very available, decent wheated bourbon, it's pretty good. That being said, I can only really give this a 65. It's just, there's nothing that's really wowing me about it. I've had some like Ben Holladay picks that were amazing. And I remember liking the regular soft red wheat, and we'll compare that in just a minute, but I kind of expect a lot more when we're getting toward almost 120 proof, right at 119.8, that I kind of expect that bigger viscosity, those bigger flavors to really kick in compared to say like the 100 proof that the standard bottle and brawn product sits at, but it just doesn't feel like it's giving me that much extra for the proof and cost. It lingers a little longer, but it's still kind of just one note. I want at least like 2 or 3 big notes and a couple subtle notes. Right, when I'm really looking at a whiskey to evaluate, to really, really enjoy and start getting those higher like 80 plus type scores. And this just isn't doing that, and that's why I'm giving it a 65. At 6 years, I know it's not super old, but a lot of the Weller products are in that 6-year age range, and they feel like they have a lot more complexity to them than what I'm getting out of the Ben Holladay Rickhouse Proof. Bad, especially at its price point, because it's not a terribly expensive bottle, but I kind of just expected more. Finish is okay. I spilled on myself. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Bubby.
I spilled a drop on my corgi. Sorry, son. Yeah, I've gone back to it a couple more times, and there's a little ethanol hit, but the thing that gets to me is it's right here, kind of in this portion of where it hits the palate, so it's kind of mid-palate. There is this, and it gets to the mid-palate fast, there's this dominant kind of florally wheat funk note going on, and that's almost all I taste. There is a little kind of barrel spice pepper in the finish, and the finish hangs on for a reasonable bit, but again, I don't feel it through here like I usually do, and I kind of like when I feel this kind of area lighten up after the palate. I feel it like up here, like in the hinge of my jaw kind of thing, and that's a little different, a little interesting. Let's quickly compare this to Ben Holladay Bottle & Bond soft red wheat and just see how that compares. Now, admittedly, my regular soft red wheat's been open quite a bit more. On the nose, there's a lot more presence. It's less proof, but there's more, and again, it is that kind of floral wheat funk thing that I'm getting on the nose. Similar note, but it's more prevalent. It's not as soft on the nose as the Rickhouse Proof was, which to me seems a little crazy. But there is no ethanol in either of these, and even though that's a fresh crack, there's not a bunch of ethanol in my face. It's all the palate. Can definitely feel that difference in proof. It's way more mellow. And similarly, the notes are more tame. There's not that big in-my-face floral note, but also that little hit of sweetness, even though it fades pretty fast, it's really gentle. I honestly think how soft this is on the palate compared to the Rickhouse Proof, I might drink this more, and that's kind of disappointing. I expected the Rickhouse Proof to be a little bit more complex and interesting, and really it's just this is a softer version of the Rickhouse Proof. There's not one in my face note, there's a couple kind of just soft notes the whole way through, and it's a little more chill and relaxed. There's a little sweetness, a little bit of that floral, and a touch of the kind of barrel spice and oak influence, but it's all really mellow. I think if you go to Rickhouse Proof, you want that big in your face thing, but you're really only getting the one note, where this is kind of three, but they're all just kind of coasting. They're not taking you on much of a ride. It kind of feels like the same thing all the way through. While it's decent bourbon, especially at its price, it's not terribly expensive. It's certainly not going to be as cheap as proper MSRP on some of our legacy distillery stuff. Weller Special Reserve as an example, if you get that MSRP, but for how available it is, this is a decent shelf whiskey. Would I rather have the Bottle and Bond or the Rickhouse Proof? I think it's a toss-up. I think if you like that kind of floral funky note, you're going to want to go into the Rickhouse Proof, because that's going to just be the primary thing on your palate. You're going to get to really go and enjoy that note a lot. It's much softer in the Bottle and Bond, but if you don't want that funkier semi-floral thing, you might want the Bottle and Bond because it's tamed down a bit and it blends a little bit better with the sweetness. It doesn't overbear every other flavor that is going to be in the palate, at least for my palate. Let's be really clear here. One last comparison, and we'll make this one fast. Rickhouse Proof to clearly what they're trying to chase, Weller Full Proof. Let's be fair here. Weller Full Proof sits at 114 proof, so it's less proof, but there is a reason that people pay an atrocious amount of money on secondary for Weller Full Proof. It's popular. It's very popular, but is it all that compared to some of these other products? So let's do a fast nose and palate and compare. I mean, if you could get Weller Full Proof at MSRP compared to the Rickhouse Proof at MSRP, on nose alone, Ben Holladay ain't standing a chance. I'm sorry. I like your story, but there's a reason that everybody goes nuts for this stuff. There's that little bit of the wheated kind of funkiness that to me tends to come off floral in Weller products, but there's more sweetness and a little bit of fruit, and there's a lot more complexity in the nose. And even at 114 proof, it's not very ethanol-y at all. Now granted, this bottle's been open for months, it's about 2/3 or so it's had time to get some exposure to air, which will tone down some of that ethanol-ness, but we didn't have any ethanol really in the nose in the soft red wheats Rickhouse Proof. So let's go to the palate. Oh, yeah, man, I love Weller 107 and Full Proof. There's so much more. It is still sitting on my palate. It is chilling. It is giving me this lovely, there's a little bit of the spice from the barrel char. There's this lovely kind of cherry fruit note going on. A little bit of that floral funky thing from the wheat. A little bit of brown sugar in there, but it's all just kind of dancing. I still feel this thing on my tongue. It's been at least a minute, and it's just still lighting up the taste receptors. You know what I'm saying? I can still taste little things. There's definitely a nice oiliness to it where it coats and sits on the palate for a while. You can tell why people go crazy for this on secondary. And if you were to get this at MSRP and you had a choice, come on, let's be honest. Comments, tell me below. Would you take the Ben Holladay or would you take the Weller Full Proof? We know the answer. We know it's the Weller Full Proof. Let's not even play. It's the Weller Full Proof. But finding it at MSRP is nigh impossible for almost all of us. Then look at its secondary price, and secondary in Washington, and what I've seen around some of the other like more national things out there, like auctions and stuff, typically is about $150 for a bottle of Weller Full Proof. And at that point, you're at basically 2 Rickhouse Proofs in price, as I recall from buying mine. It's slightly less depending on where you are, but taxes are a thing in Washington. We have some high taxes, which is unfortunate. But assuming you got Ben Holladay Rickhouse Proof at MSRP, and it's roughly double to maybe 2.5 of the Ben Holladays for a Weller Full Proof. Would you still go with the Weller Full Proof, or would you go with the Rickhouse Proof? That's what I want to know from you in the comments down below. For me, I'm somebody who alternates between a lot of whiskeys, and when I go to something, I really want to enjoy it, so I would probably go Weller Full Proof. But from a pure availability standpoint, that bottle is so hard to get for almost all of us. I feel lucky that I have mine, that I think if you wanted a really good weeder, the Ben Holladay is an interesting choice. But again, I don't think that it's so stand out that it's a must-have on the bar. I think it's an interesting choice to have on the bar if you want to have a kind of like funky weeder experience. But if you're looking for something that's a bit more sweet, like say the Maker's Profile tends to be, or some of the other weeders that are out there, you've got so many options, and many of them come in a little cheaper for a similar product. So I can't rate it that high. That's it. I hope you've enjoyed this little shelf hero or zero. In this case, I don't think we're a hero, but we're definitely not a zero. We're kind of in the middle. We're like an above average guy. And for a lot of people, that's okay, right? That's okay. It's a decent sipping whiskey, and especially if you want something that's made outside of the Kentucky distilleries, it's an option to look at, and it's relatively available and well distributed. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you like Ben Holladay? Do you not like Ben Holladay? Do you prefer the Bottle and Bond over the Rickhouse Proofs? I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. Of course, like, do you have experiences with Weller? Are you the person that doesn't like Weller? Are you like the small minority out there that's like, Weller is garbage, I don't know why people pay this much money for it, I would rather have Makers or whatever? I'd love to hear that in the comments down below as well. If you haven't, please consider subscribing. Once we hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel, we're gonna do a giveaway, and the very first bottle we're giving away is an E.H. Taylor single barrel, which these can be very hard to find in some places, or moderately hard to find in others, but it's one of my absolute favorite products. It's got the awesome tube, you know, all the usual things that we taters love, but at the same time is just phenomenal whiskey. So that's one of probably multiple once we get there, but we'll see. But at very minimum, you have an opportunity to win that bottle. So consider subscribing and be watching out in the future for more editions of 2 Minute Tuesday. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.